Francis Throckmorton was a man who swore he would die for his faith. He swore he would die for the woman he believed was his rightful queen. But in the cold, damp dungeons of the Tower of London, he would discover that some fates are infinitely worse than death. He believed his will was iron, his cause divine, his loyalty absolute. He was wrong. The ancient stones of the tower have heard 1,000 secrets, but few were ever ripped from a soul with such agonizing, surgical precision. This is the story of how one man's ideals were systematically shattered on the rack, and how his tormented confession sealed the fate of a rebellion, the future of a nation, and his own life. This is the story of the man who broke. To understand how a man ends up broken in the most feared prison in England, you first have to understand the world that made him. Francis Throckmorton, born in 1554, was a product of a fractured England. This was a kingdom literally torn in two by faith, a nation holding its breath under the rule of a Protestant queen, Elizabeth I, while the old Catholic world plotted its return from the shadows. The Throckmorton name was a powerful one, woven into the very fabric of the English aristocracy. His family was prominent, respected, and dangerously divided. His uncle, Sir Nicholas Throckmorton, was a trusted diplomat for Queen Elizabeth, a man at the very heart of the new Protestant establishment. But Francis's side of the family clung stubbornly to the old ways, the old faith. His father, Sir John Throckmorton, had been a senior judge, a powerful man under the last Catholic monarch, Queen Mary I. Though he outwardly conformed to Elizabeth's new church, the seeds of Catholic devotion were planted deep in his children. Francis and his brother, Thomas, grew up in a household where whispered prayers and hidden loyalties were a part of daily life. This was an England of two faces. Publicly, you attended the Protestant services as required by law. Privately, for thousands of Catholics, loyalty was a complex and deadly game. Your true faith could cost you your property, your freedom, and ultimately, your life. The air was thick with suspicion, a constant, low hum of paranoia. Neighbors spied on neighbors. Servants reported on their masters. Every word, every letter, every journey could be twisted into a sign of treason. Francis was described as a gentleman well-educated and of good wit, a bright young man who studied at Oxford and later, law at the Inner Temple in London. But his real education wasn't taking place in lecture halls. In 1580, he and his brother Thomas embarked on a journey to the continent, a trip that would transform him from a disgruntled believer into a dedicated and doomed conspirator. Europe at this time was the epicenter of the Counter-Reformation. In France and Spain, powerful Catholic leaders dreamed of retaking England for the papacy. Paris was a hive of English Catholic exiles, men who had fled Elizabeth's rule and now spent their days and nights plotting her downfall. It was here, in this hotbed of righteous fury and intrigue, that Francis Throckmorton found his purpose. He met with charismatic figures like Charles Paget and Thomas Morgan, zealous agents who served the one person they saw as the rightful, divinely appointed Queen of England, Mary, Queen of Scots. To be clear, Mary was not the reigning Queen of England. That was Elizabeth. Mary was the Catholic alternative. Held for years under house arrest in England, she had become a living symbol of the Catholic cause, a magnet for every plot, every whispered conspiracy aimed at the English throne. To men like Throckmorton, she wasn't a prisoner. She was a queen in waiting, a holy martyr enduring the tyranny of a heretic. The stories he heard from these exiles painted a picture of a holy war. They spoke of the Duke of Guise in France, Mary's powerful cousin and a formidable Catholic general, who was eager to lead an invasion force. They whispered of King Philip II of Spain, the most powerful man in the world, who might be persuaded to fund their noble enterprise. To a young, idealistic man like Francis, steeped in tales of chivalry and religious duty, this was an intoxicating vision. It was a chance to be a hero, a crusader, to restore his faith and win eternal glory. The disgrace of his own family fueled his fire. His father, Sir John, had been suspended from his post as a judge and died a year later, his career ruined by suspicions of his Catholic sympathies. While the exact cause of his death is debated, Francis surely saw this as a persecution, a personal injustice that merged with his religious fervor. He wasn't just fighting for God, he was fighting to restore his family's honor. In 1583, Francis Throckmorton returned to England. He was no longer just a lawyer and a gentleman. He was an agent, a messenger, a vital link in a chain of treason that stretched from the castles of Scotland to the palaces of Paris and Madrid. He set himself up in a house on Paul's Wharf in London, a location that would become the nerve center for the most dangerous plot of its time. He carried secret letters, coded messages that traveled between the imprisoned Mary, the Spanish ambassador in London, and the plotters in France. He was playing the most dangerous game in Tudor England, utterly convinced that his cause was just, his spirit unbreakable, and that his chosen queen, Mary, was destined to triumph. He had dangerously, fatally, underestimated the forces aligned against him. He had no idea that from the moment he set foot back on English soil, he was being watched. In the shadowy world of Tudor espionage, a plot is a delicate and deadly thing. It is a web of whispers, of coded letters, of clandestine meetings in darkened rooms. The Throckmorton Plot of 1583 was a grand and terrible design, ambitious in its scope and breathtakingly audacious in its goal: to overthrow the most powerful monarch in a generation and change the course of English history forever. The plan was as simple as it was treasonous. First, a massive invasion of England would be launched by a foreign Catholic force. This army was to be led by the formidable Henry, Duke of Guise, cousin to Mary, Queen of Scots, and a military hero of Catholic France. The invasion would be financed by the seemingly bottomless pockets of King Philip II of Spain and blessed by the Pope himself, lending it the terrifying air of a holy crusade. But the invasion force would not act alone. The second crucial element of the plot was a simultaneous uprising of English Catholics. For years, a silent network of Catholic nobles and gentlemen had been festering, waiting for their moment. Throckmorton's primary task was to be the liaison, to confirm who was still loyal, who was willing to risk everything to rise up against Elizabeth the moment foreign soldiers landed on English shores. And what would be the ultimate prize? The assassination of Queen Elizabeth I. With Elizabeth dead, the government would be thrown into chaos. The rebellion would seize control, and they would march to free the woman at the heart of it all, Mary, Queen of Scots. She would be placed on the English throne, and the Protestant experiment would be extinguished. Catholicism would be restored as the one true faith of the land. There were even whispers and hopes among the conspirators that once Mary was queen, she might marry the Duke of Guise, who would then become King of England, sealing a new, powerful Catholic alliance between England, France, and Spain. It was a dream of a united Catholic Europe, with England as the newly reclaimed, blood-soaked jewel in its crown. Francis Throckmorton was the central cog in this intricate machine of death and rebellion. His house in London became a clearinghouse for secrets. He was the go-between, the trusted messenger who connected the three essential points of the conspiracy: Mary, languishing in her genteel prison; Bernardino de Mendoza, the arrogant and influential Spanish ambassador in London; and the cabal of exiles in Paris, led by Thomas Morgan and Charles Paget. The communication was painstakingly secretive. Letters were written in complex ciphers, the alphabet twisted into a secret language only the conspirators could understand. These messages were not sent through normal channels. Instead, they were routed through the French embassy in London, using the diplomatic pouch to bypass the prying eyes of English officials. Throckmorton would deliver letters to and from Michel de Castelnau, the French ambassador, who would then pass them on. In fact, Throckmorton was in the very process of encoding a letter directly to Mary when the door to his world was kicked in. His work was meticulous, and every act was another step towards the gallows. He wasn't just a simple courier. He was an intelligence gatherer. He drew up lists of Catholic sympathizers across England, a roster of potential rebels who could be counted on when the time came. Even more damning, he researched and created detailed maps of the English coastline, identifying harbors and inlets that were poorly defended, perfect landing spots for an invading army. These weren't just ideas, they were logistical plans for war. Every document he created, every name he wrote down, was another nail in his own coffin. The plot was a masterpiece of international intrigue. It brought together the two great rival powers of Europe, France and Spain, in a rare moment of unity against a common enemy. The Duke of Guise was a fearsome figure, a man infamous across Protestant Europe for his role in the brutal St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where thousands of French Protestants were slaughtered. His involvement lent the plot a terrifying credibility. The Spanish ambassador, Mendoza, acted with the full confidence of his king, using his diplomatic immunity as a shield to engage in blatant treason against the very country that hosted him. Mary, Queen of Scots, was the sun around which these plotters orbited. Though a prisoner, she was far from powerless. She managed her network with skill, her letters a constant stream of encouragement, instruction, and pleas for action. There is evidence that she knew Throckmorton was her agent. In June 1583, she asked the French ambassador to apologize to Throckmorton for not writing to him directly, acknowledging the great danger of their correspondence. After the plot began to unravel, she even offered her own money to the Guises to keep their invasion plans alive. She was a desperate, intelligent, and dangerous woman who believed the throne of England was her birthright, and she was willing to see her cousin Elizabeth killed to claim it. Yet, for all its grand ambition and high-powered players, the plot had a fatal flaw. It was, as one historian noted, amateurish and overly optimistic. The conspirators were blinded by their own zeal. They underestimated their enemy, and, most critically, they underestimated the one man in England whose entire existence was dedicated to stopping men exactly like them. They believed their web of secrets was impenetrable, but a single, unseen thread had already been pulled, and the entire structure was about to come crashing down around them. In the great, bloody chess match for the soul of England, the Catholic plotters had their queen, their bishops, and their knights. But Elizabeth had Sir Francis Walsingham, and Walsingham was a player unlike any other. He was the Queen's principal secretary, but his true title, earned in the back alleys and secret chambers of Europe, was spymaster. Walsingham was a man forged in the fires of religious conflict. A devout and utterly uncompromising Protestant, he had been forced into exile during the reign of the Catholic Queen Mary I. He had lived in Switzerland and Italy, where he didn't just wait for the storm to pass. He studied the dark arts of the Italian city-states, the masters of intelligence, espionage, and political manipulation. He returned to England with a singular, all-consuming purpose: to protect his queen and his Protestant faith from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Walsingham did not see the world in shades of gray. He saw it as a stark, existential battle between light and darkness, between the Protestant truth and the Catholic conspiracy. He had been the English ambassador in Paris in 1572 and had witnessed the unspeakable horror of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre firsthand. He saw Catholic mobs butcher thousands of Protestants in the streets. That event burned itself into his soul. It confirmed his deepest conviction that Catholicism was a violent, treacherous, and relentless force that would stop at nothing to eradicate his faith. He believed that to fight such an enemy, one had to be more cunning, more ruthless, and more patient than they were. He built a machine for this purpose, the first truly modern state security service in English history. His spy network was a sprawling, intricate web that stretched across England and deep into the royal courts of Europe. He had agents in every major city, from Rome to Madrid to Paris. He paid priests to betray the confessional, bribed courtiers for pillow talk, and turned disgruntled servants into loyal informants. He employed brilliant cryptographers, men like Thomas Philippes, who could break the most complex codes the conspirators could possibly devise. His philosophy was terrifyingly simple: know everything. Know their plans, know their names, know their secrets before they even knew they had been discovered. Walsingham's genius was in understanding that information was the ultimate weapon. He didn't just wait for plots to happen. He actively sought them out, sometimes even nurturing them like a spider tending its web, allowing them to grow just enough so that he could catch not just the foot soldiers, but the masterminds. The Throckmorton plot did not escape his notice for long. In fact, he was likely aware of Francis Throckmorton almost from the moment he began his deadly work. The fatal crack in the conspiracy's wall of silence was the French embassy in London. While Throckmorton believed it was a safe haven for his secret letters, it was, in reality, already compromised. Walsingham had an agent inside. This spy, known to history only by the code name Henry Faggot, was perfectly placed to observe the comings and goings of anyone foolish enough to conspire under that roof. In April of 1583, Faggot sent a report to Walsingham. It was simple, but electrifying. Francis Throckmorton had been seen dining with the French ambassador. A month later, another report arrived. The chief agents for the Queen of Scots are Throckmorton and Lord Henry Howard. The net had been cast. Walsingham didn't strike. Not yet. That was not his way. To arrest Throckmorton at once would only catch a single messenger. Walsingham wanted the entire network. He wanted irrefutable proof of Spanish involvement. He wanted to know every English nobleman with a traitor's heart. And most of all, he wanted to tie the plot directly and undeniably to Mary, Queen of Scots. So he watched, and he waited. For 6 long months, Throckmorton went about his business, believing he was invisible, a ghost in the machine. Every letter he passed, every meeting he attended, every map he drew was noted. Walsingham's agents shadowed him, logging his movements, identifying his contacts. He was a fly caught in a web, and with every move he made, he only entangled himself further. Walsingham was giving him just enough rope, coldly confident that eventually, the young conspirator would hang himself with it. It has even been suggested that Walsingham played a far more devious game. Shortly before his arrest, Throckmorton managed to send a casket full of sensitive documents to the Spanish ambassador, Mendoza. Some historians believe this wasn't a lucky escape. They suggest it was exactly what Walsingham wanted him to do. By allowing the documents to reach Mendoza, Walsingham could confirm the Spanish ambassador's direct complicity, giving him the political ammunition he needed to remove a dangerous foreign agent from English soil. Walsingham was a master of this dark art. He was patient, methodical, and utterly without mercy when it came to the security of the state. He knew the plot was growing, he knew the players, and he knew the stakes. The tension was building, a storm gathering just over the horizon. All that was needed was the perfect moment to strike, the moment when the evidence would be undeniable and the damage to the Queen's enemies would be absolute. In November 1583, after months of silent, watchful waiting, that moment finally arrived. The spymaster was ready to make his move. The autumn of 1583 was cold and damp in London. For Francis Throckmorton, the chill in the air was about to become the defining feature of his existence. After 6 months of silent, suffocating surveillance, Sir Francis Walsingham decided the time had come to spring his trap. The moment of reckoning arrived with a sudden, brutal finality. In early November, Walsingham's men descended on Throckmorton's house near Paul's Wharf. They didn't come with a polite knock. They came with the full, terrifying force of the state, a sudden, violent intrusion into the conspirators' secret world. Throckmorton was caught completely by surprise. At the very moment the agents burst in, he was hunched over a table, frantically working to encode a secret letter destined for Mary, Queen of Scots. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. With astonishing presence of mind, he managed to destroy the most incriminating document in his hands, throwing the nearly finished letter into the fire just as the men reached him. He also succeeded in sending a bundle of other treasonous papers to the Spanish ambassador, Mendoza, smuggled out of the house by a trusted maid. But these were small, futile victories. It was already too late. The search of his house was ruthlessly efficient. Walsingham's men knew exactly what they were looking for. They tore the place apart, and what they found was a conspirator's treasure trove. They unearthed a collection of documents that laid the entire plot bare, a blueprint for treason. Chief among them were 2 particular sets of papers that would seal Throckmorton's fate. The first was a list of names. Not just any names, but a comprehensive roster of the certain Catholic noblemen and gentlemen across England who had pledged their support to the uprising. This was the backbone of the domestic rebellion, a who's who of treason within the kingdom. To Walsingham, this list was gold. It was a roadmap to the Queen's internal enemies. The second discovery was even more damning. They found maps of the English coastline. These weren't idle sketches. They were detailed charts pinpointing specific harbors and ports, chosen for their strategic value as landing sites for a foreign invasion force. This was not the work of a mere dissident. This was the logistical planning of a military operation. It was cold, hard, undeniable proof of a conspiracy to levy war against the Queen. At first, Throckmorton tried to bluff his way out. He feigned outrage, confusion. When confronted with the papers, he denied they were his, claiming they must have been planted by the searchers to frame him. When that lie failed, he tried another, admitting the papers were his but claiming they had been given to him by a man who had, conveniently, already fled the country. His desperate stories were useless. Walsingham had him. Throckmorton was taken into custody. For a few days, he He was held and questioned, likely in a place where the pressure could be steadily increased. But he refused to crack. He was, at this point, still the zealous idealist, convinced he could protect his friends and his queen-in-waiting, Mary, by remaining silent. He had no idea what his captors were capable of. He was about to be introduced to a place designed specifically to break the will of men like him. He was taken to the Tower of London. To a Tudor Englishman, the very name of the tower was a synonym for terror. It was not a common prison. It was the ultimate destination for enemies of the state, for those accused of the highest of crimes, treason. Its stone walls held the ghosts of fallen queens, disgraced nobles, and failed rebels. It was a place of profound dread, of isolation, and of unimaginable pain. The moment Throckmorton passed through the Traitor's Gate, the infamous water entrance from the River Thames, he would have known that his life was effectively over. The only question that remained was how he would die, and who he would take with him. Within the tower's formidable walls, the psychological torment began immediately. Prisoners of high rank were often held in solitary confinement, deprived of comfort, light, and human contact. The silence, the cold, and the ever-present threat of what was to come were weapons in themselves. But Francis Throckmorton was not just any prisoner. He held the keys to a vast, international conspiracy, and Sir Francis Walsingham was not a man who would let silence stand in his way. Throckmorton's defiance had only ensured one thing, that his journey into the heart of the tower was not over. He was heading for the dungeons, for the interrogation rooms where the state's darkest instruments awaited. The time for questions was over. The time for pain was about to begin. The will of a man is a fragile thing. Francis Throckmorton believed his was forged from steel, fortified by an unshakable faith and a holy conviction. In the stinking bowels of the Tower of London, he would learn it was made of flesh and bone, and that both could be systematically, scientifically broken. Walsingham needed a full confession. He needed Throckmorton to confirm the involvement of the Spanish ambassador, to detail the invasion plan, and most importantly, to implicate Mary, Queen of Scots. When initial interrogations failed, when Throckmorton held fast to his story and refused to name his co-conspirators, the Privy Council issued the necessary warrant. They authorized the use of torture. In the Tudor period, torture was not a routine punishment. Its use was legally restricted, reserved for the most serious cases of treason, when the very security of the realm was at stake. It was a tool of information extraction, a brutal but horribly effective method for forcing a prisoner to reveal secrets he was determined to keep. Throckmorton was taken to a grim, windowless room deep within the tower. There, he was introduced to the most infamous instrument of Tudor England's justice, the rack. The rack was a simple and horrific device, a wooden frame with rollers at each end. The prisoner's ankles and wrists were fastened with ropes to these rollers. As the interrogators turned the levers, the rollers would pull in opposite directions, stretching the victim's body. The initial pain would be intense, as muscles were strained to their limits. As the stretching continued, joints would be dislocated, shoulders, elbows, knees, with an audible pop. If the torture was pushed to its extreme, limbs could be torn clean from their sockets. Throckmorton was laid upon this machine of agony. The questions began again. Who were your contacts? What were the invasion plans? What was Mary's role? He refused to speak. And so, the levers were turned. During his first session, he was courageous. He endured the searing pain. His body stretched to the breaking point, but his lips remained sealed. He would not betray his friends. In a remarkable act of defiance, he even managed to smuggle a message out to the Spanish ambassador, Mendoza, written in cipher on the back of a playing card. The message was clear. He would die 1,000 deaths before he confessed. But Walsingham and his interrogators were patient. They knew that pain was a cumulative weapon. They gave him respites, not out of mercy, but out of strategy, allowing the agony in his joints to throb and swell, to fester in his mind, before bringing him back. He was shown the rack again, and the mere sight of it, combined with the memory of the pain, began to eat away at his resolve. He was racked a second time. The pain, which had been excruciating before, now became a white-hot, all-consuming reality that burned away everything else. Still, he held on. His resistance was astonishing. It was a testament to the power of his belief. But the human body has its limits. The interrogators knew this. They understood the psychology of pain. It wasn't just about the physical torment. It was about the utter destruction of hope. It was about reducing a proud, idealistic man to a state where the only thing in the universe that mattered was making the pain stop. The final breaking was inevitable. By the time they brought him to the rack again, his body was a wreck, his joints screaming in agony. His will crumbled. His ideals, his loyalty, his faith, they all dissolved in a flood of unbearable suffering. He confessed, and once he started talking, he told them everything. The words tumbled out of him, a torrent of names, dates, and plans. He admitted to his role as a go-between for Mary and Mendoza. He confessed that the Duke of Guise was preparing to invade England, backed by Spanish money. He confirmed the plan for a Catholic uprising to coincide with the invasion. And, most critically, he admitted that Mary, Queen of Scots, was not only aware of the plot, but was an active participant. In one account of the confession, after the ordeal was over, Throckmorton rose from a seat beside the rack, a broken man. He is said to have exclaimed, "Now I have betrayed her who is dearest to me in this world." And then he added that he now wanted nothing but death. It was a complete and total victory for Walsingham. The confession was a devastating blow to the Catholic cause. Throckmorton had given the spymaster everything he wanted: proof of an international conspiracy, the names of internal traitors, and the final, crucial link to the woman Walsingham believed was the root of all England's troubles. Later, Throckmorton would try to retract the confession. At his trial, he would claim that it was extracted from him under duress, that he would have said anything, confessed to anything, to make the agony of the rack stop. But it made no difference. The state had what it needed. The words, once spoken, could not be unsaid. They had been written down, witnessed, and sealed. Francis Throckmorton, the steadfast conspirator, had been systematically deconstructed, his loyalty burned away by pain until nothing was left but a confession that would condemn not only himself, but the very cause he had been willing to die for. The use of torture was a dark and brutal reality of Tudor justice, reserved for moments of ultimate crisis. It forces us to ask a difficult question. Was Sir Francis Walsingham a ruthless tyrant who violated human dignity to achieve his goals? Or was he a necessary patriot doing what had to be done to save his queen and country from imminent invasion and collapse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. He broke under torture. The man who betrayed Queen Mary. A confession extracted by torture is a powerful weapon. In the hands of a spymaster like Sir Francis Walsingham, it was devastating. Francis Throckmorton's words, spoken in the agony of the Tower's dungeon, sent shockwaves through England and across Europe. The betrayal was complete, and the aftermath was swift and merciless. The first and most immediate casualty was Don Bernardino de Mendoza, the Spanish ambassador. For months, he had operated with arrogance and impunity, using his diplomatic status as a shield while actively plotting the overthrow of the government to which he was accredited. Throckmorton's confession shattered that shield. It provided Walsingham with undeniable proof of Mendoza's complicity. While diplomatic immunity protected him from a traitor's trial, it could not protect him from disgrace. In January 1584, Mendoza was summoned and officially expelled from England. He left threatening to return with an army, but his expulsion was a major diplomatic victory for Elizabeth. It severed the primary link between the English conspirators and their Spanish paymasters, and while there would be other Spanish envoys in the future, it shattered formal diplomatic relations for years. Next, the web tightened around the English Catholics named in Throckmorton's confession. Walsingham's agents swept across the country, arresting suspected sympathizers. While many managed to escape, including Throckmorton's own brother Thomas, others were hunted down and imprisoned in the Tower. The lists of names found in Throckmorton's house had provided a chillingly clear roadmap of dissent. The entire Catholic community was thrown into a state of terror. The failed plot unleashed a new wave of suspicion and persecution, making life for ordinary Catholics, who had no involvement in treason, infinitely more difficult and dangerous. But the most significant consequences were for the woman at the center of it all, Mary, Queen of Scots. Throckmorton's confession that she was aware of and active in the plot was a devastating blow. Although Elizabeth still hesitated to move directly against her cousin, a reluctance that drove her council to fury, the discovery of the plot changed everything for Mary. Her comfortable imprisonment was over. She was moved to more secure and isolated locations, like Chartley Hall in Staffordshire, under the watchful eye of a new, stricter custodian, the stern Puritan Sir Amias Powlett. All her correspondence was now to be heavily monitored, her contact with the outside world choked off. Walsingham was grimly determined that she would never again be the center of such a dangerous conspiracy. The Throckmorton Plot had moved Mary one giant, fatal step closer to the executioner's block. As for Francis Throckmorton himself, his fate was sealed. His trial was held at the Guildhall on May 21, 1584. It was a public spectacle, a show trial designed to demonstrate the absolute power of the state and the terrible price of treason. Throckmorton, now a shadow of his former self, stood before his accusers and tried to fight back. He dramatically retracted his confession, declaring that it had been forced from him by torture and the false hope of a pardon. "I would have said anything to stop the pain," was the essence of his desperate defense. His plea was useless. The court had his signed confession, corroborated by the damning documents found in his home. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. He was found guilty of high treason and sentenced to the most horrific death the law could devise, to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. On July 10, 1584, Francis Throckmorton was dragged from the tower to the public execution site at Tyburn. It was a gruesome and theatrical end, designed to be a terrifying deterrent to all who watched. In his final moments on the scaffold, he made one last, desperate attempt to control his narrative. He once again revoked his second confession, calling God to witness that his betrayal of Mary and others had been drawn from him by fear and false promises. He reportedly went to his death very stubbornly, refusing to ask for the Queen's forgiveness. He was hanged, but cut down while still alive. He was then disemboweled, his entrails burned before his own eyes. Finally, his lifeless body was beheaded and cut into 4 quarters, the pieces destined for display on the city gates as a grisly, silent warning to all would-be traitors. Of all the men involved in the grand conspiracy, the powerful Duke of Guise, the wealthy King of Spain, the cunning exiles in Paris, only one paid the ultimate price. Francis Throckmorton, the idealistic go-between, the man who believed he was a soldier for God, was the only one executed for the plot that bore his name. His breaking in the tower had given Walsingham the victory he craved, but in the end, it was Throckmorton's mutilated body that served as the state's final, brutal message. The death of Francis Throckmorton was not the end of the story. It was a beginning. The shockwaves from his confession and execution radiated outwards, fundamentally reshaping the political landscape of England and setting the stage for the final, bloody act of the drama between Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots. The most immediate and terrifying legacy of the Throckmorton Plot was an extraordinary document known as the Bond of Association. Crafted in 1584 by a panicked Privy Council, led by Walsingham and his ally William Cecil, the bond was a radical and unprecedented solution to the endless problem of assassination plots. It was, in essence, a nationwide pledge of lynch law. All Englishmen who signed it, and thousands of nobles and gentlemen did, were obliged to take an oath. They swore that if any attempt was made on Queen Elizabeth's life, they would hunt down and execute not only the assassins themselves, but also any person in whose favor the assassination had been attempted. There was no ambiguity. The Bond of Association was pointing a dagger directly at one person, Mary, Queen of Scots. It created a legal framework for her execution outside the normal bounds of law, making it clear that even if she wasn't holding the knife, if a plot was hatched in her name, she would pay with her life. Mary herself was presented with the bond. One can only imagine the chill she must have felt as she read the document that was, effectively, her own death warrant. In a move of calculated defiance, she appended her own name to the document. With her signature, the trap was set. The Throckmorton plot had failed, but it had created the very instrument that would ensure the next plot would be Mary's last. And that plot was not long in coming. Just 2 years later, the Babington plot would be uncovered, and the Bond of Association would be invoked to legally justify Mary's trial and execution. The failed plot also had profound international consequences. The expulsion of the Spanish ambassador Mendoza was a point of no return in the relationship between England and Spain. The Cold War that had been simmering for years grew hotter. It exposed Philip II's hostile intentions beyond any doubt. pushing England further down the path that would lead to the open warfare of the Spanish Armada just 4 years later. Domestically, the plot solidified the power of Walsingham and the hardline Protestant faction at court. It vindicated their ruthless methods and their paranoid worldview. Elizabeth's own famous declaration that she did not wish to make windows into men's souls was becoming an untenable position. The constant threat of Catholic plots, now proven to be backed by foreign powers, led to harsher laws and stricter enforcement. Fines for refusing to attend Protestant services were increased, and the lives of English Catholics became a daily struggle against suspicion and state surveillance. Throckmorton's betrayal had poisoned the well for his entire community. What, then, is the ultimate legacy of Francis Throckmorton? He is a tragic and deeply complex figure. He was not the mastermind of the plot. He was a passionate, perhaps naive, young man who was used as a pawn by more powerful and more cunning forces. He was a man of deep conviction who, in the end, was broken by unbearable pain. His story is a chilling reminder of the brutal realities of Tudor politics, where faith and loyalty could lead a man to the highest ideals and the most agonizing, horrific end. The Throckmorton plot was a failure. The invasion never happened, the uprising never materialized, and the Queen was never harmed. But in its failure, it was a spectacular success for Elizabeth and her government. It exposed her enemies, shattered their networks, and gave her the tools she needed to eliminate her greatest rival. It secured her throne by revealing the depths of the danger she faced, uniting many of her people in a wave of patriotism and fear. In the cold, dark rooms of the Tower of London, one man's screams gave a queen the security she had sought for a quarter of a century. Francis Throckmorton dreamed of being a martyr for his cause. Instead, his tormented confession made him an unwitting architect of its demise, and in doing so, helped forge the future of the nation he had tried to destroy. His life was a testament to the human cost of political ambition, and his death, a grim and bloody footnote in the ruthless consolidation of Tudor power.